Hello, and welcome to the Impact of COVID-19 on American Workers presentation and panel discussion webinar. I'm Bryn Moore, partner at Trusted Talent. On behalf of our presenters and our panel, I would like to thank you all for joining us. We are looking forward to sharing the findings of the study and having the opportunity to dig a little deeper with a truly amazing panel. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. First, due to scheduling challenges, this webinar has been pre-recorded. We will be providing a copy of the presentation and the recording of the session to all participants and across social media. Should you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any one of us following the webinar. By way of background, we set out to work on this study as we believe that now more than ever, it's critical to measure employee sentiment. Despite challenges over the years with global recessions and other major events that have impacted us, today's workforce has never faced a global pandemic. The magnitude of the challenges that have resulted from COVID-19 is impacting every aspect of our lives. While it's true many industries have undergone massive digital transformations and acceptance of virtual working in recent years, the pandemic has forced companies to accelerate and embrace the digital world and remote working. How we work today is significantly different than a mere few months ago, which is incredible to think about. With this study, our hope is to provide you with some insights into how it's affecting today's workforce. So let me take a moment and introduce you to our team today. To start us off with a presentation of the study findings, we have Lila Reiner, CEO of Logica Research, and Lisa Wilding-Brown, Chief Research Officer at InnovateMR. Following their presentation, I will be joined by a truly dynamic panel comprised of Allison Lewis, Group Manager, Consumer Market Research at LinkedIn, Eric Ellis, President and CEO of Integrity Development, and Ivy Lau, Global Policy, Public Policy and Research Relations at PayPal. And now, to start us off with the study findings, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you so much, Bryn. So great to be here. I'm so thrilled to be presenting this with all of you guys today. You know, several months ago, Lila, Bryn, and I observed the struggle that many in our industry were facing as we all try to navigate our new normal. This industry is not lacking for COVID-related research, but we couldn't find really a lot of good resources that were specifically tailored to the experience of American workers. So we decided to partner along with WIRE, Women in Research, to conduct two studies. One focused specifically on the experience of insights professionals, and one focused on the general working public. This presentation will focus on the latter. We really wanted to understand the impact as well as the needs of working men and women, and really contribute to the broader conversation and find material ways to help employees and employers alike navigate this incredibly challenging time. Our presentation will review three key areas: work satisfaction, work and finance, and uncover the divide that exists among men and women, as well as other diverse groups. Of course, this divide is not new. However, the pandemic has helped to further exacerbate some of the issues facing American workers, and we have some interesting data to really help showcase this fact. So here's a quick recap on our methodology. We fielded an online quantitative study that was 12 minutes in length and optimized for both mobile and desktop participants. We achieved 1,000 interviews among Americans and focused on those who are working, as well as those who were laid off or furloughed due to COVID. Should be noted that we excluded frontline workers, and the study fielded from May 20th to June 2nd and fielded entirely here in the US. Now, we want to put some context to the fielding period, as this did field a few months ago. We want to remind everyone what was really happening during this time. The horrific and deeply unjust death of George Floyd occurred on May 25th. Additionally, during this time period, weekly jobless claims were still very high, but on their way down, and they've relatively flattened, but the total is hovering around a staggering 50 million unemployed workers here in the United States to date. The stock market had a rally and was up as of June 2nd. It's been relatively steady with some light bounces for the last few weeks. And our team also compared results before and after May 25th, since we fielded over this tragic day, but we did not see significant differences in the data despite the death of George Floyd and the protests that ensued across our country. Okay, so who do we hear from? Here's a quick visual recap of our sample composition. We had an even split of males and females, a solid regional balance, and we also captured the generational breaks that you see here. Younger generations are more diverse, with millennials being most varied. A big contributor here is the Latino population of millennials. Younger generations are more ethnically diverse. Latinos contributed most at 26% of millennials, 16% of Gen X, and 8% of boomers. Millennials are more likely to consist of those identifying as Asians and African Americans as well, and the median income was just under $68,000. Okay, let's take a look at the impact of COVID-19 as it relates to work satisfaction. The overall likelihood to continue respondents' current field of work after COVID-19 is high at 94%. African Americans and Latinos are less likely to continue with their job after COVID, but this number is still very small. White contributed to 5% versus African Americans at 12% and Latinos at 8%. And it's important to note that participants with higher incomes are most likely to continue their field of work, according to what was self-reported in our study. The next slide covers confidence in workers' current job, and we see confidence degrade slightly here when compared to the likelihood to maintain their field of work, as we saw on the last slide. 67% of workers feel extremely or very confident that their job will still exist in 6 months, but do keep in mind that frontline workers were excluded in this study, so the number is likely lower. We did see many people indicate that the pandemic could bring about new opportunities, such as the verbatims highlighted here. And I won't read them all, but there was quite a bit of positivity that we saw in some of these open-end responses. Workers are moderately satisfied with their employer. COVID has had mixed impact, with almost a quarter of American workers saying satisfaction increased, while over 1 in 10 say satisfaction decreased. Next, we asked about the level of satisfaction workers feel now versus pre-pandemic, and 23% of workers indicated increased satisfaction, while 14% indicated a decrease in satisfaction. Latinos indicated less satisfaction. White and African Americans are more likely to have stayed consistent when it comes to satisfaction in a pre-pandemic environment versus today. Again, those with higher incomes are more satisfied at 56%. In terms of the verbatims we observed, some participants indicated that their employers demonstrated understanding and empathy, while others shared that communication and support have been lacking. In terms of career, satisfaction is relatively low at 59%. And we also saw a mix in perceptions as it relates to career opportunities in a post-COVID world. Whites are more likely to be very satisfied with their career at 44% versus 28% of African Americans and 33% for Latinos. In terms of a change in satisfaction from a pre-COVID world versus current conditions, whites are more likely to have stayed the same at 75% versus 59% for African Americans and 64% for Latinos. African Americans are more likely to see a lack of change in career opportunities at 26%, followed by Latinos at 21%. So we're definitely observing a divide here as it relates to the white population versus other diverse groups. Next, we looked at how productive Americans are feeling, and the results were pretty mixed, with the lion's share indicating they feel somewhat productive at 38%. Next, we asked managers how easy or difficult it is to manage a team remotely. 34% find it easy. However, 50% indicated it was somewhat easy or even difficult. So respondents are definitely not united here and likely feeling the pressures of balancing their managerial duties with all of the other competing priorities that many of us are facing today. We also dug into some of the specific challenges of managing remotely. Productivity and supervision of employees came out on top at 39%, with internet reliability, scheduling, tech, and background noise all presenting themselves as issues facing managers today. So now I will pass it over to Lila, who will review our results from the work and finance piece of our study. Lila?
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much, Lisa, and thanks, Bryn, for the great introduction. I'm going to be taking you through the next couple of sections here. First of all, work and finance. And Lisa was just talking about productivity. And one of the key themes that we see in productivity that kind of goes throughout is there's really a mix of experience, and people are experiencing very different things right now. So even though we are all experiencing pandemic, and maybe even initially it felt like we're all experiencing the same thing, we're starting to see more and more of a divide that's played out in many different ways. Specifically about layoffs and furloughs. So 3/4 of our survey population have not been laid off or furloughed. We're seeing 25% have been furloughed or laid off. And just in comparison, we have some other more recent data on this. We're starting to see this come down a bit. At the time that we fielded the study, unemployment rate was really starting to get an all-time high, and it's starting to come down a bit now. What we did find out from some of the qualitative research that we did coupled with this is that, especially in the research world, a lot of companies are really trying to plan to not have as much staff reduction as possible. But when we look at what's going on for people in the general public, for American workers, again, we see this mix. So we see about half of the people in our survey who are actually working less than they were before COVID, and about half are not experiencing any change. And then about 11%, or actually exactly 11%, are working more. And we're seeing that in terms of responsibilities that people have, again, we see a mix. So about half of the population has no impact on their responsibilities, while others are either experiencing a decrease or an increase or a different kind of work. So it's when we start kind of peeling apart the different groups where we see these real differences. And so we'll talk about that in a second some more. First of all, we wanted to show you what managers are experiencing. We probably have a lot of managers watching or listening into this. And about 1 in 5 managers reported that they had to lay off or furlough someone, so reduce staff. And when they did, almost about half of their staff. However, the flip side of that is that about half are expecting to be able to hire people back, and that will happen pretty quickly as well. So we wanted to take a look at what is happening by income level. Again, just getting to this idea that different people are experiencing different impact on their work right now. So American workers who are making less than $75,000 have a very different experience than American workers who are making more than $75,000 a year. So those lower income American workers are more likely to have been laid off or furloughed. They're working fewer hours. They're also more likely to have decreased responsibilities, and with that goes less satisfaction with their employer. They're less optimistic about their state of their personal finances, and they're not as confident that their job will exist in 6 months. So let's dig into that divide a little bit more. So first of all, we're going to talk a bit about gender differences here. And we see that half of our survey population is married. And in those married households, it's actually men who are the primary wage earner in 74% of those households. And so you could start to see gender differences play out in different ways when we look at the results further. So we're seeing that 30% of American workers have partners work who's been negatively impacted, but that's more true for men's partners. So women are more likely to have been impacted. And with that goes some differences in terms of optimism about personal finances. So half of American workers are optimistic about their finances in the next 6 months. This is not a great percentage. When we look at other survey data over time, people are generally have been pretty confident and optimistic about their finances. But in this case, we're really seeing a downturn with COVID. And men are more optimistic than women. When we couple some of those gender differences with how people are working from home and taking care of kids right now, we see that gender divide get even bigger. So on this slide, you're seeing that just how people are working from home versus versus working in the office and what their preferences are. Most people are working from home right now, and there's really a big split in terms of preference. So we've got about a third of the people who want to continue to work from home, about a third who want to work in the office, and then a split in terms of being able to combine office and home in the future. So if you're a manager working on plans for the future and you're thinking that it's hard to make everyone happy, yes, it is hard to make everyone happy because people do definitely have different needs. We are seeing differences by generation here. Millennials are more likely to be working from home right now, and they also would like to go to the office more. And we aren't actually seeing a gender difference here in terms of preference, but women were more likely to be working from home before COVID hit. So it's a potentially an easier transition or not as much of a change for them. So here's where we see the impact on childcare. So 42% of American workers are sharing childcare responsibilities equally with their partner, but 40% of women are really solely responsible versus 14% of men. And we have 44% of workers saying that taking care of children has impacted their work. And over a quarter of people have had to reduce their schedule, or their partner has had to reduce their schedule to take care of children because of COVID. And this is really timely as we talk about this now, as kids are headed back to school and we see this impact with remote and home learning and who's taking care of the kids. So when it comes specifically to who's taking care of the kids and helping with school activities, again, we have 41% who are doing that equally with their partner. We have 55% of women who say they're doing it versus 24% of men. And more men are likely to say that their partner are taking care of the kids and helping with school activities. So again, if you're a manager or you're an employee, you're working with people and trying to come up with schedules, you can see such a difference in impact on gender with women taking the lion's share of the childcare. So how does that relate to anxiety? We wanted to understand some of the impact on mental health for people, and we asked a anxiety rating scale here for people to self-rate themselves on a scale from 1 to 10. And we have people just kind of moderately anxious, if you will, just giving themselves just below a 5, but almost half of people, 49%, have higher anxiety because of COVID. That's a big impact, and I'm sure we can all relate to that finding as well. When we look at specific emotions that are experienced, or if you will, symptoms of that anxiety, we have 42% of people who are stressed, a third of people who are overwhelmed, almost a third of people are having trouble sleeping, people are overeating and depressed. And we see gender differences as well, where women are experiencing more of these symptoms at a higher level than men are. So when we look at these differences by diverse groups and whites, Lisa talked a lot about some of the differences in work satisfaction, and we see a number of differences here. So diverse groups, including Latinx, Blacks, Asian, Native Americans, are more likely to be working part-time. They're more likely to be single. They're more likely to have decreased work responsibilities. They're less likely to be satisfied with their career or their employer. And on the other side of that, though, they are seeing some positive change in terms of what's happening at the company. They're seeing a greater understanding of the importance of childcare in school across the board. So maybe companies didn't have as much of an understanding of that before, and they're seeing an increase. and companies focusing on decreasing inequalities in our society and focusing on the impact on our environment. Their anxiety is also significantly higher than whites. And Lisa, I know you had something to add here in terms of sampling for diverse groups.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this topic really warrants a whole bunch more webinars on their own and really greater discussion overall related to a multicultural focus and improved inclusion of diverse groups in market research, not only in our surveys, Lila, but in our organizations as well, quite honestly. And, while our focus was on the American workforce here, we had a limited sample, which prevented us from really drilling further into some of the inequities that we observed in the data. So while we would love to tackle this challenge and solve for it here, there really is greater discussion that we believe our industry is really currently lacking. And this includes, lack of diversity in samples, adequate quota design in our surveys, and appropriate incentives to truly engage a wider cross-section of the American population. So, with that said, I've been super impressed with clients like yourself, Lila, and other industry peers who are bringing this important topic to the forefront. And so I'm excited to kind of let our viewers and our listeners know that I recently helped to initiate a consortium called Voices of Equity in partnership with one of our fellow Wire exec members, Carrie Edelstein, who's the founder of entertainment and media research company Research Narrative. Our group represents several thought leaders in the research space, all from very diverse backgrounds and disciplines. And our goal is to really help the industry move forward. And as Eric said recently to me, to transform a moment into a movement. And I just thought that was so powerful. So it really resonated with me. So we're seeking to make material changes as it relates to all aspects of diversity and inclusion, as well as advise brands really on how they can execute research strategies that help to appropriately represent diverse groups and generate an authentic brand message that resonates both internally and externally to all of their constituents. So we don't have time to go into more detail today, but if anyone listening is interested in getting involved or getting their organization involved, certainly please feel free to reach out to any of us and I'll put you in touch with the right people. Lila?
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. So a lot of what we've talked about can feel a little bit bleak. There is a big impact of COVID on American workers. It comes in terms of our wallets and our income. It comes in terms of how we're taking care of our children and being able to manage children at home, and the needs that we have from our employers and our managers to help manage anxiety and those impacts right now. But before we turn it over to the panel, I want to end on a couple of positive notes here. So we did ask people what some of the positive outcomes of COVID are. And we've seen some of these things in other studies in the headlines, but spending more time with family, no longer needing to commute, working on house projects, connecting more with family and friends, no longer needing to travel for work, and having more work-life balance. So what we want to leave you with here before we have the panel discussion is conclusions around empathy. So we talked about how people's experiences are really different right now and their needs are different. So a goal of ours is to help motivate you or inspire you to be curious, to understand what your employees are experiencing and what they need, understand what your customers or clients are experiencing and what they need, and identify specific ways that you can take action. So Bryn, over to you and the panel.
Thank you, Lila, and thank you, Lisa, for a really compelling presentation on the findings and helping us better understand, what worker sentiment is. And I'm super excited about welcoming our panel, Allison, Ivy, and Eric. You guys have such a diverse background, and it's really exciting to have you here following the presentation from Lisa and Lila. I wanted to kick things off by asking you all about this theme that we saw throughout the data and the presentation on tension between employers and employees. And there's kind of, added into that mix is a lot of anxiety. Is there anything that you guys could provide us with in terms of a deeper understanding of what might be going on there? And I'd start with Eric, please. And I can't hear you. You might be on mute.
That's right.
Thank you, Eric.
One thing that has gotten my attention over the last few years was a study that Gallup had done a few years ago of full-time workers around the globe, where they discovered that 85% of people don't like their jobs and 75% of people don't like their bosses. When I first saw that, I was like, oh my God. And I concluded that one of the things that organizations sometimes struggle with is creating people-centered workplaces, that they oftentimes can focus more on their products and their services, and they believe that the people side of their work should be on autopilot. So I believe that that only gets magnified when you're in a global pandemic right now. And many organizations have certainly tried to respond well to caring about their people, but there's still a hill to climb there.
The autopilot is an interesting concept because that is almost not intuitive right now with people working remote, right? There used to be this idea that if you were working remote, you clearly weren't working, but that has had to go away. So very interesting comment. Ivy, would you like to come in on this topic?
Yeah, I might take us on a different direction because when I looked at the study findings and hear the word anxiety, my mind immediately goes to how COVID has laid bare the structural inequities that we see in our economy, that it is experienced very differently for lower income workers versus higher income workers. Some of us experience a higher degree of anxiety than others, and I'm sure there are other dimensions of differences that we have all read about in the news. And it makes me think back on a study that PayPal and Lila partnered on a year ago, looking at the impact of future of work on financial health. And before COVID, we already saw very clearly the challenges of job insecurity and income volatility. And with COVID, the volatility has turned into simply a cliff drop. And I wonder how much automation may or may not accelerate further during this time. And I think that introduces another dimension in the relationship between employers and employees. How long do you actually need me for? And then if you think about millennials, which is a generation more dependent on gig work than other generations, this is the second cataclysmic economic event in just about a decade. And so I worry about the immediate financial health impact, but also what this means for longer term recovery and resilience of workers, and how that changes the longer term dynamic and relationship between employers and employees.
That's a very large topic. I think that there could be a whole webinar on that, because it truly is kind of where we're all going to net out, is really trying to understand that and trying to help as best we can. And I think, employers have done everything they can to try and get people settled to work remotely and get business moving forward. But there are some long-term impacts there. And I think you've touched on something super important. Allison, would you like to provide some insight into this topic as well?
Yeah, well, a couple of thoughts. I'd say to build on what Ivy is talking about, one thing that is top of mind for me is, so LinkedIn is running our own workforce confidence index right now. Very similar findings to one of the things we're seeing today. People's confidence in terms of the future of their financial health is pretty low. We started tracking this in COVID times really seriously, and so it's pretty low. But what's interesting to me also is people's confidence in terms of their career progression, and how that varies across different groups, different industries, different parts of the country, at least like thinking within just the U.S. which is concerning, right? And I think about that from a personal perspective as well at LinkedIn, which is one of the selling points to come into tech, and I think into LinkedIn, is the ability to progress your career. And I think that's where I think about the tension between employer and employee right now, is like, if that's a selling point for why you join a company, and we're, a lot of companies, LinkedIn included, are dealing with layoffs and having to like rejigger and think about our company plan and make sure we're holding to our commitment for how we brought people in. That's the biggest tension I think I see happening right now, which is, I'll go back to millennials, which is like, I have a team of almost all millennials who all want to advance their career and move up and get promoted and move to different jobs. And how do I balance that with, hey, we should all be thankful to have a job right now, and let's focus on that, which is going against, really one of the selling points for a company. So I think that's one of the interesting tension points as well.
Absolutely. And companies are trying to deal with that, but there's so much uncertainty across the board, right? Like, I thought a lot of this would be done in June, right? All of a sudden, here we are, and we've got other things that are happening. So yeah, I do think that that's part of the tension, and it rubs into people's personal life as well, right? Before we were working remotely, there was kind of that, you put on your suit, you go in the office, and you've got your game face on. Now it's all kind of morphed into being at home. And it really hit me when I saw my son doing school from home, right? Where he has his game face when he goes to school and he has a great time, and then he comes home and nests, right? But now it all kind of is coming together. And I think that that's also something that's adding to the tension. While it is fun to be able to see a cat walk across the screen when you're on a Zoom call and we're all accepting of it, there is a little bit of tension in terms of that breaking of work versus home. So I don't know if you guys have anything you wanted to add to that or thoughts about that.
Well, I think there's so much uncertainty. We've heard that maybe 30% of businesses will never come back. And so I think people haven't really fully grasped what this is going to mean for us. Mm-hmm. I mean, as we look at so many of these major corporations that are going down, that's sort of unsettling for everyone. And so people are afraid in many ways to even be frank and open in the workplace because they're trying to secure and protect their job for the future. So no one's ever really even calculating the impact of stress on, how we're interacting with each other. But there still is a lot of fear, and we're not sure when the second shoe is going to drop.
So what would you say to employers and employees? How do they manage this time? How do they think about this? Because to Allison's point, people are trying to think about their long-term career, yet we have a short-term problem right now. So how do you manage that?
I'll add just one other thought. I believe that what's needed, we know that diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams. We also know that they bring more innovation. And so I believe that what we have to do is start advancing the ball and not just retreating. And we have to begin to look at how do we utilize diverse voices to help us think about how we might survive. I believe that 30% of businesses that people are saying are not going to return, if you infuse in those a greater amount of diversity, I think you would also infuse in them some creative ideas that would enable them to pivot in ways that they might be able to take advantage of this time instead of just falling back and waiting for death to come.
Oh, no.
Right.
I think we should move forward, don't you?
That's right.
Absolutely. So if we kind of move a little bit along with the data that we saw, and we think about how 74% of men are the primary wage earners and are more likely to have partners that are impacted by this pandemic. And we see that women are feeling a lot more pressure with the school and children homeschooling and kids at home. Do you guys see that there's a time now for employers to kind of step up and help them navigate this?
I'm happy to jump. I have a lot of perspective on this. So like one, I'd love to take that survey myself and also have my husband answer it, because I'd be curious to see what he would say. And I say this with all the love in my heart, because I can so relate to that. So first, I would say I feel like I am truly lucky to be part of that 42% of people who say they split childcare responsibilities. And I will also add kudos to my husband to say, like, if I had to really, nail down like who does what, he probably does more. Like he does all the cooking, grocery shopping. I kind of, like let him take the driver's seat there. So I feel very lucky in that we may be very unique in that, or I may just be very vocal in my needs and make sure that he does more than 50% of the job. But that being said, like, I think about March hit and all of a sudden California was working from home. And immediately when we talked about scheduling and who's going to do what, we solved for his needs. So I have a beautiful 1.5-year-old daughter. And, at the start of the pandemic, we had to figure out, without any sort of childcare help, how are we going to take care of her? And, we solved for my husband's needs at the time, because he has a team he runs out of New York. And being on East Coast times and working in the morning and being available for that team was the priority. It's August. I know this goes live in September, but we're later on in the year. It's been 6 months, and that's still the schedule. I take care of my daughter in the morning, and I go to work in the afternoons, which is an exhausting day. And we put her down, and then we go back to work, which is very tiring. To your question on what employers should do, it's like I feel lucky that LinkedIn at first and foremost, the most important thing to do is acknowledge it. And acknowledge that everyone is going through very different things at home and very different things personally. And so I feel comfortable and lucky that LinkedIn has acknowledged that. That's the first and foremost thing. The second thing is like, what do I actually need? I need a boss that's going to let me work flexibly. And so that was the first thing that I had. I feel very lucky I have a boss who's like, as long as you're getting your work done, and you're staying sane, that's fine. Third is we have official support. So we have an emergency family accommodation fund, which will pay for me to take days off for childcare should I need to, which I feel like these three things are like the basics that need to be happening right now. But the most important thing is to really listen and hear what is happening. Like, I think, Bryn, I laughed, is like that old assumption of people working remote if they're not working is like, that's not true. To make an assumption that I'm not working because I don't want to is not actually true. It's probably because I have a toddler screaming, right? And so sitting back and trusting your employees and trusting that they're doing the best that they can, and everyone is coming from a very different angle of what's happening to them in their own personal life. And you have to create a safe space for people to share what's happening, to figure out what they need. And that's, I think, the very first thing a company needs to do is acknowledge it and then find the right solution.
I would agree with that. And I also think that, to your point, the employers and managers are going through similar things that their employees are going through. And it's a very unique point in time. And so the ability to really have empathy and to really listen is so important right now. So yeah, and I think you're very lucky what you guys do have at LinkedIn. So that's totally awesome. Eric, do you see anything as it relates to diversity here where you might be able to help us think a little bit differently?
Well, I think that one of the things we're seeing is that certainly people at higher level incomes they've had flexibility for a lot longer. I'm seeing that many of my clients are really doing everything they can to be sensitive to all of the diverse people and talents and skills and functions as they can. But that's a moving target. What you find is, for example, with millennials, we're seeing a leveling of the playing field for them in some ways because they are born with technology. So sometimes some of the older senior executives that may not have the same skill set, younger people are feeling like the ground is beginning to level a little bit there. But then if you have people that are more administrative and they have to go remote, they don't have a lot that they can do remotely. And so, and then you have, we said in the study that a lot of people are saying, hey, I have less drive time. but how people are navigating that is real different. Some were seeing their time that they spent driving to work and coming back as wind down time or wind up time. And they don't have that right now. So in many instances, it's very difficult for them to separate work life from their home life. And they're just sort of being caught up in many ways, working a lot more. And so I think we're going to have another set of stressors that people are going to be dealing with. So it's a lot of challenges. And you find that organizations are asking the question a lot more. How are you feeling? How are you feeling? How are you feeling? And some people are saying, thank you for asking that question. Others are saying, please, enough already. I don't want to talk about this anymore. So it's not easy to find ways to keep your hand on the pulse of your people. I do believe that trying to develop systems that will enable you to gauge how employees are feeling is really important. I was just talking to a client. I've got 2 clients that's starting up sort of bi-weekly surveys, and I'm so excited that I finally have some clients that are really going to be gauging employee perception on a bi-weekly basis to make sure that they're constantly hearing from them a lot more. I think that can be helpful.
And they need to keep this going over time, right? It's not one of these things that you start and then you stop.
Right. Absolutely.
And to the group, I would ask, do you think this idea of getting employees to work remotely, which seems to be working across the board to a large degree, is something that will continue over time? Or do you think that it'll just be a blip and we're all going to be back in our offices, business as usual? Ivy? You have any thoughts on that?
It depends on how long it would take for the pandemic to be under control, especially for companies where larger groups of employees get together. So if we're talking about 5,000 people on one campus, I think that will probably be harder. But if we're talking about 10 people in one office, I think, like we might see it might be another story of different parallel track development.
Right. Interesting. Allison, did you have some thoughts on that?
I think what we've seen from our own employee data is that people just want the flexibility to have options. I don't think I've met anyone on my team that wants to be fully remote. We have a couple that were already before and want to continue to be post-pandemic, and folks that are interested in moving around right now. But when the offices, at least for our offices, open up, people want to, like, by and large, most of our employees want to be back. They just want the flexibility of working remotely from time to time. Whereas before, we've always had that policy, but it felt a little bit more strict. And now I feel like everyone's proven that they can be productive. And so that's not a question anymore. But I think people really want sort of what you'd call is like a combo model, not necessarily like one or the other.
Eric?
Right, and what I'm seeing is a myriad of responses. There are many clients that I work with. We're going to sort of put their toe in the water someday around having their people work more remotely. And COVID-19 says, no, we're going to throw the whole person in the ocean. And so organizations then have come out of that learning that people are dependable, they're responsible, and they're going to get work done. So I'm seeing some of our clients are even beginning to make plans for less office space needed and that kind of thing, and really trying to accommodate workers that will be working in greater numbers remotely. But the thing that people don't really have a good handle on is how is that going to affect teamwork? How is it going to affect the individuals? Many people needed that time away from home, depending on what their domestic lifestyle was with their significant other, with their children, trying to navigate that. Not everybody has space in their home to be able to accommodate work. And so there are just so many other unknowns that I think we're still kind of wrestling with, and we don't know what the end of the story is.
Well, we will all stay tuned, I'm sure. On a lighter note, and I think this next question would be a great one to wrap up with. There were some positives that have come out of the study in terms of how workers feel about being able to spend more time with family, Also talked about less drive time. So there are a few things that are positive that have come out of that. And I'm wondering if you each would share a moment that has been a positive impact for you on this whole strange time that we're living in. Who would like to go first?
I'm happy to go first.
Okay.
So my household, like maybe 90% of others in San Francisco, have taken on making sourdough bread. We're also learning new music instruments, learning watercoloring, using like YouTube channels, and just a whole host of other creative endeavors. But I think most importantly, we just have been able to adjust to a more unhurried pace of life. So we can be more like 100% present to each other at the dinner table and tell stories and laugh and cry and discuss current events together. And so that has actually made this time quite special and bittersweet.
That's beautiful. Allison?
Yeah, I'd say, the brightest spot for me is I got to see my daughter take her first steps, which I have heard is a parent's highlight, and it definitely was. No one has walked as great as my daughter ever before in history. She's the best. That sounds like a classic parent. But that wouldn't have happened if I was commuting downtown every day, and I had, we had fantastic nanny share with another family, and no one else saw that for the first time and videotaped it and sent it to me, and I envisioned myself crying at work, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm missing this moment. I got to be here, and I got to be there to encourage, and also see her just go from walking 2 steps to now she runs all over my house, which is beautiful, but tiring. So I'd say, yes, definitely a bright spot of something that I wouldn't have had and definitely banked on if I hadn't been working from home during this time.
Eric?
Well, I would say that there's 2 things that come to mind. Number one, so it's my wife and I who've been married over 30 years, and we've got 4 children. So the first thing that we thought is, oh my God, we are so happy that our children are all in their 20s now. Because if they were all back in elementary school, that would have been a nightmare. So we're just running around every day kind of snickering that we don't have little kids. That's the funny part. The other side, though, is that in our 4 20-somethings, they were all with us. We were all in the same home there for about 2 or 3 months. And I'll tell you, that was a gift. It was almost like a gift of overtime, where we may never, ever again all be in the same place for the rest of their lives. And we got this moment. And we also got a chance to work on communication skills and some of the things that I teach around empathic listening. I was able to utilize that with 2 of my sons, who sometimes, they get along really well, but sometimes they have conflict. And to watch them sit down and one say something and the other sort of paraphrase that back, the content and the feelings, was really almost just brought tears to my eyes to see them go beyond just the tool to really begin to apologize for things that they had done in the conversation. So we really have received some gifts as a family of being able to become even closer.
That is awesome. Those are great stories. I am wondering if we can get Lila and Lisa to join us, and maybe they can share a story as we wrap this up.
Yeah, those
Lila?
are great. And I was lucky enough to have my teens home more, which, when you think of parenting and teens, you don't always think about luck. But I had my son home, homeschooling, and my daughter, who just is going off to college. I got some extra time with her before she went to school. So definitely my highlight as well. And I feel like that's time that I never would have gotten otherwise.
Yeah, from my side, it's the same thing. I have 2 boys. One is almost 15. I can't believe I'm old enough to have a 15-year-old, but here we are. And the other is 8. And so we all, the 4 of us, my husband and I and our kids, settled in and got used to our new normal. And we started having dinner together almost every night. It's not every night, but we really try hard to sit down at the table together and have family meals. And we, life was really crazy before the pandemic. I was traveling a ton. My husband was traveling a lot for his business. And we were kind of like two ships passing in the night and not really spending enough quality time as a family. So it was a really special time for us to kind of regroup and revisit what our priorities should be. So, it's been a bittersweet experience for sure.
And I'm just going to add one comment to that. Ivy, you mentioned how things slowed down, and it really is something that did happen just in the whole community as well. At home, we are having more dinners, we're playing cards, we're communicating, but just being out on the street, people are waving. It's amazing. And I feel like we took a collective deep breath. And so there has been some good that's come out of this. And one of the things that was great that came out of it was getting together with all of you to do this presentation and panel discussion. And I would like to thank you all, Eric, Allison, Ivy, on behalf of Lila, Lisa, and myself. Thank you for your time and for your thoughts and for just being a part of this. It's been a real joy. And that wraps us up, guys. Thank you.